All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ad Hoc Committee on Comprehensive Job Creation Plan. Today is Wednesday, November 18th, 2015. I'm Paul Krikorian, joined by Council members Wesson and Englander, and our other two members will be joining us shortly. Today we're going to be discussing a motion introduced by Council President Wesson, which instructs city departments to examine the regulatory framework in which they operate and whether those regulations continue to serve their original purpose or sometimes stand as an inhibiting factor in jobs development and economic development. We'll also be hearing from the General Manager of Economic and Workforce Development Department on the department's various efforts to promote citywide economic development plans, and we'll be getting some of the background on how we got to where we are today with regard to the creation of the department and the fulfillment of the department's original mission. So we'll also be taking public comment on these agenda items and any other item that anyone would wish to offer comment on. I don't see anybody likely to submit a card, but if anybody is here and would like to offer comment, just fill out a card and bring it forward. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce item number one.
Item number one is a motion, Wesson Price instructing the CLA and CAO, in coordination with the City Attorney and other relevant city agencies, to report on the current regulatory code as it pertains to business development, recruitment, and retention in the city.
All right, so, Mr. Wesson, would you like to
Well, I'd like to
speak
just
to
hear.
this? Is it your motion? Or
Well, basically, what I would say, this committee was created, and I'm so pleased that you agreed to chair this, to help us make it easier to do business in the city, put us in a position where we can try to retain businesses, attract new businesses, create jobs. And just one of the things that I think is important is that we need to check the rules and regs to see if any of these are obsolete or could be altered or changed or eliminated. So I'm just curious and excited to hear what our great city staff has to say on the subject.
Okay, very good. Mr. Englander, any comments or questions on this? We don't have any report on this yet. Okay. All right, then without objection, we'll go ahead and adopt the motion and advance that to council. Does that need to go to any other committee?
Economic development.
It is going to go to economic development from here. Okay, then we'll adopt it, and we hope they will as well. That brings us to item number two.
Item number two, Economic and Workforce Development Department report relative to an update on efforts to create a citywide economic development plan.
Very good. So I'd like to first invite up the CLA to give us some of the background on the roadmap by which we got here, and then when you're done with that, we'll ask the General Manager, Ms. Perry, to come on up and talk about what the department's doing. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Dora Huerta with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. I was asked to provide some background on the entities that carried out major economic development activity prior to the formation of EWDD. Historically, the city's economic development activities have been carried out by a number of offices and departments throughout the city. Prior to the establishment of EWDD, the Community Redevelopment Agency of the City of Los Angeles and the Community Development Department managed the most financially robust programs in the city. The CRA, established in 1948 pursuant to redevelopment law, helped alleviate blight by addressing affordable housing, infrastructure, and economic development. Each of its 32 redevelopment project areas had its own comprehensive redevelopment plan, outlining strategic geographic investments aligned with unique needs in that area. Some of the typical economic development functions carried out prior to its 2012 dissolution included business assistance programs, small business loans and grants, responses to development opportunities, encouraging and assisting private sector site assembly, financing, and development of properties. The magnitude of the CRA's financial capacity to carry out economic development throughout its project areas is demonstrated in its robust $459 million budget of which approximately $60 million was dedicated to economic development opportunities and $26 million was dedicated to public improvements, which often supported economic revitalization efforts. In addition to the work of the CRA, there were a number of programs housed in the Community Development Department. When CDD was dissolved, various functions and programs were assumed by EWDD, including work source centers, business source centers, and overseeing a number of city loans, including the Section 108 loans. Within the last 3 years, due in part to the 2012 dissolution of the CRA, the city worked to preserve economic development programs and initiatives. It consolidated CDD's programs and some of the former CRA efforts into what is now known as the Economic and Workforce Development Department. In addition to EWDD's functions, other city departments carry out critical functions relative to job creation and economic development, including the Mayor's Office of Economic Development or its business teams, Department of Water and Power Economic Development Division, the Bureau of Contract Administration, which administers its small local business program, the Department of Finance, which offers small business exemptions. These programs continue to exist and operate independently of EWDD. That concludes my overview of the major economic development activity prior to the 2013 formation of EWDD.
Very good. Well, thank you for setting the stage, and I'd like to invite up Ms. Perry now to present on behalf of the department. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Before I get started, I just wanted to introduce my senior management team who's here today. Why don't we start with you, Meg?
I'm Meg Barclay. I'm the Chief Grants Administrator for Market Investment and Innovation.
And Jaime Pacheco.
Jaime Pacheco, Roscoe, Director for Personality Services.
And then Michael Cole.
Michael Cole, Executive Officer, EWD.
And then our interim AGM for Economic Development, Samuel Hughes, is actually, I think, in a meeting with Councilmember Blumenfield, so he should be here soon. And then our consultant is here. Hi, Mercy. Anyway, she's been really, we've been very fortunate to have the benefit of her expertise. So we have a PowerPoint today. You're okay on the hitting? Okay, great. So we worked very closely with your staff to make sure that we had all of your questions answered in the context of this presentation. So I'm just going to talk about it a little bit, and then obviously it'll be up there on the screen for you to read. But we believe that the Economic and Workforce Development Department is a department that has the ability and the capacity to be the economic link to neighborhoods and communities and residents who have yet to benefit from the economic resurgence in the city of Los Angeles. We think that this economy and this department can create a very robust and diverse initiatives that reaches all communities through development and through job creation and our delivery system for job placement. Now, CLA touched on this a bit, but we had an ordinance, and you can see that up on the screen. It was adopted in April of 2013 with a clear purpose to not only replace lost powers with the elimination of the CRA, but to make sure that our city's economic development delivery system was user-friendly and to consolidate economic development efforts under one roof. So just to give you a sample of how we perceive we interpret the ordinance, we have a list of functions, goals, if you will, stated in the ordinance to revitalize communities, generate economic growth, expand the job base, increase city revenue, make the economic development process a lot easier, attract net new businesses and industries, and retain existing businesses and industries in the city. Now, on this next page, on the left side, you'll see green, that's for economic development, and the purple is for workforce development. We wanted to do some side-by-side comparisons for a bit. The majority of the powers and the duties outlined in the ordinance were directly associated with economic development program delivery, while fewer workforce guidelines were included. Now, the most notable powers assigned to EWDD is this: the centralized authority over the planning, coordinating, promoting, implementing, and managing of all economic development activities within the city, and managing all funding resources for economic development activities and controlling the acquisition and disposition of real property for economic development. So when the department was created, the city was in the midst of its own economic recovery, which limited the availability of ongoing general fund commitments to the department and instead asked the department to perform new responsibilities based on current sources of funding. I came in as general manager mid-2013 and immediately began the process of building a foundation for this new department, and I had some issues facing me as I walked in the door. One was to strengthen our relationship with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, to rebuild staff capacity and to find funding thereof for staffing and for projects. The first step in this rebuilding process was to ensure that our department's relationship with its major funding source, the Housing and Urban Development Department, or HUD if you will, was reinforced as the department undertook this new path. Now, to ensure that this relationship got on the right path, under my leadership, we sought HUD technical assistance in order to improve our policies and our procedures surrounding grant management, project financing, and programmatic implementation. This was very important because with our new duties and powers, these types of programs that would roll out would be varied, and their success would be impacted by how we basically implemented our own internal policies. Also, when I arrived, there were a number of outstanding audit findings from HUD that required an immediate response and became a top priority to ensure that as we developed new programs, past obstacles did not stand in the way of future progress. Finally, we recognize the immediate need to create opportunity for capital investment in economic development programs, and noting that the general fund was not an option initially, the department began the process of doing workouts on several Section 108 loans, which will ultimately lead to the creation of 1,600 net new jobs and more available capital for reinvestment as these loans come into good standing and are repaid over time, so that we can use that money as a revolving loan fund. So then the step after that was strengthening staff capacity. When this department was created, there was a very critical shortage in staff with experience, and this was caused by the loss of the CRA, and also some of the staff transferred up to HSID to support that department after the split. So understanding this need, I moved forward with filling pertinent positions and bringing in staff to deliver on its purpose. We undertook a restructuring process to have an efficient system that was reflective of our department's new mandate under the ordinance. So during the process of strengthening staff capacity, and you'll see that chart up there, again, the green is ED, the purple is workforce development. It became very clear that we needed an in-depth analysis of our budget to ensure funding matched our mandate. It became very clear that our primary funding source, CDBG, and Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funds, or WIOA, were not flexible enough to accomplish the economic development duties outlined within the department's implementing ordinance. WIOA and CDBG are both grant programs, as you know, with very specific objectives and regulatory requirements handed down from the federal government, and CDBG in particular, which is the primary source of funds for EWDD staff, strictly limits the amount of funding that can be used for admin purposes. So any other funds used for staff must result in a completed project, or HUD must be repaid from the general fund, which is something we seek to avoid. This makes it difficult for EWDD to dedicate staff time to any project that is clearly not feasible in early phases. Such projects are typically not the kinds of projects that need public assistance. So we're not getting where we need to be funding-wise. CDBG and WIOA funding are so narrowly tailored that their use for broad-reaching economic development programs is probably unrealistic. With the majority of the funding being explicitly designated for workforce development, and you can see it in this chart here, there's a very clear mismatch of priorities and funding. The City Council has provided the powers and the duties, and it's provided the staff. The next step is the required funding. I guess if we had to draw an analogy, we have a car, we have our destination, everything's in place, but we need the gasoline to get there. Let me talk a little bit about how the department is structured. We have structured ourselves to deliver on the powers and duties of the ordinance. So we've built the department around what the ordinance asks of us: asset management and real estate, economic strategy and marketing, market investment and innovation. The Workforce Development Division continues to operate and implement the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and I must say they do a very good job with that, and we have great metrics in that regard. The Asset Management Unit is in place to act as the city's representative in acquiring or disposing of city-owned land determined to be of economic development value. This process includes the City Council, CAO, General Services, and any other relevant department in identifying property and clearing up encumbrances necessary to move towards creating value for that property in terms of job generation, job creation, or just value enhanced. Because of its focus on property developed for economic development and the role of this division, I would argue that we are distinct from other asset management roles served by other city departments, most notably General Services and the CAO's office. This unit will also lead efforts in underwriting parcels and projects. When the city determines its interest, it's in its best interest to write down land costs of a parcel in order to promote an economic development purpose. Moving forward, there are more opportunities for this unit to partner with HCID on CRA LA option properties, and during the budget process, this unit will be presenting priority parcels to City Council to consider for economic development purposes. Now, the Economic Strategy and Marketing Unit can be considered EWDD's brain trust, if you will, for economic development, looking at economic trends, developing long-term cluster-based strategies for the city, and developing programs that can be implemented by the Market Investment and Innovation team. The biggest opportunity that lies ahead for this unit is to help lead the city's efforts in enacting its powers granted on AB2 and carry forward with CDD's traditional roles of establishing an economic development zone, an enterprise zone, the compiling the data, putting the maps together, and the justifications for the city's approval. This is a new opportunity for funding for projects and staff, which is much more flexible than our federal sources. The Market Investments and Innovation Unit is the implementation arm. This unit manages our financial instruments used for project financing, our business source program, and the complicated capital projects. This unit takes the policy ideas and programs developed in economic strategy and marketing and implements them to create the jobs and generate revenue for the city. This unit's opportunities on a going forward basis lie in developing new financing instruments to support a range of customers from small and micro businesses to investing in large-scale strategic developments that do create jobs and increase opportunities in communities that have been yet untouched. Now, our Workforce Development Division manages the city's workforce development programs funded from federal, state, and local government sources, and to some extent from private philanthropic entities. We have a network of service providers, 17 work source centers, 16 youth source centers, which we redesigned to align with the workforce, with the WIOA Act signed July 2014. Now, in program year 14-15, we launched a redesigned adult workforce delivery system to emphasize the integration of strategic partners like the State Employment Development Department, the State Department of Rehabilitation, the Community College District, the Los Angeles Unified School District to coordinate services. This new system emphasizes training in high-demand employment sectors. The system focuses on job seekers with barriers to employment, including people with disabilities, returning vets, English language learners, people who have had interface with the criminal justice system, and people who have had a history of homelessness. Key opportunities in this program and in the coming year include a new Department of Labor Performance Partnership Pilot Initiative and the Los Angeles Regional Initiative for Social Enterprise, as we call it, LA RISE. These are strategies to train workforce center clients for jobs in high-growth sectors and regional workforce planning, and to provide summer youth employment opportunities for young people who are disconnected. On the next slide, on the funding analysis, you can see from the very bold colors, again, green being economic development. EWDD is currently funding much of the economic development division using CDBG as a funding source, but as program delivery, there's not sufficient funding under the CDBG admin cap. So, in other words, we need money to pay for the staff and the administrative things that are associated with moving our programs forward. While this works at our current level of funding, and it's very tight, in order for the department to perform at a level envisioned by the ordinance, a more flexible source of funding to cover our admin costs will be needed. So let me just wrap it up for you here. This last page of recommendations. They're presented and outlined in our report. We believe would allow us to meet our citywide economic development challenges as envisioned by the ordinance. And as a department, I think that we've laid the groundwork and shown that when appropriately resourced, as we are with workforce development, we can meet whatever challenge is presented to us, and we look forward to moving an agenda on the city's economic development front.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else to add?
I'm slipping the slides.
Welcome,
All right.
welcome home.
Yeah.
Very much.
Well, and thank you for a thorough and detailed report and plan. This is kind of the to-do list that I think a lot of us have been waiting for a while. And so I really appreciate that you've put it concisely into one place. We are going to have a lot to discuss going into the budget year about how to do this and provide you with the gas in the tank that you need. But as I look at the list of functions that CRA formerly performed and that we all are suffering so badly from having lost, it does appear that either currently or in your plan for the future, many of those functions will eventually be replenished within the department. So that's good. But I guess the first question I have is, our economic development functions seem to be scattered around the city quite a lot. And I want to hear your comments about how that impacts our ability to have a comprehensive approach, what suggestions you might have for further consolidation, or whether it's appropriate to have economic development functions in other areas outside of your department that also supplement the work that you do. Is it more of a help or a hindrance?
I think it slows things down, and I think we could move projects along much faster if we had some aspect of consolidation. I think Assembly Bill 2 will give us that opportunity if we are able to come to some understanding on establishing Community Revitalization Authority. That may be a framework under which we can operate so that everybody has a seat and everybody has equal standing and everything would be vetted on the public record. And that may eliminate the need to protect one's turf, because it really is about moving projects through and getting them done and having them financed and you know, getting people hired and have them job ready. So, yeah, I would say that right now it's scattered, although we do work very well with the CAO's office and the CLA's office, and we work well with General Services and, you know, any other department. But, you know, when somebody comes into the city with a project, there's no one place that they can start. And I think that's hard for people who are inbound. And I think that it's you know, we intervene when we can catch something if we didn't initiate it, but, you know, we're not going to catch everything unless it came through our door.
Right. Now, on the asset management side of this, you talked about some of the strategic opportunities, and one is creating this priority list of city assets that might be utilized for economic development. It's been something that we've talked about for as long as I've been here, and even getting a list of city assets seems to have been a challenge, let alone prioritizing them and marketing them and applying them for economic development purposes. So I'm pleased that we're taking a step forward. Can you talk a little bit about what the process will be for identifying what the opportunities are? I mean, even if we have a comprehensive list of properties, how do you then break that down into a priority list? What are the evaluation factors that we use? How do we market it? How do we figure out how to connect an asset that we may have with a business opportunity?
Well, we look at the actual parcel itself, its geography, its proximity, the demographics in the immediate area, its proximity to public transportation, the types of jobs that it has the potential for creating. You look at the legislation that has either been passed or is pending citywide on things like mixed use, mixed income, affordable housing, and then try to view that through those various filters to come up with something that's reasonably consistent, but I guess with some flexibility given the vast spread on what different council districts would need to see if we can get the body to adopt a policy so that we can put together either a request for proposal or a request for information from those who would have the potential for developing those properties to give some shape to this so that we can get something in the pipeline to put out there in the marketplace in as broad a possible way to get some responses and include the ability to, fund, since our resources are somewhat limited, tax credits, whatever else private somebody can bring to the table, and then figure out a way to vet that, and that, again, might be through something like an authority.
So it sounds like the prioritization part of it is mostly on the government side of the screen, and then once we have a priority list, we send it out into the private sector and see what comes back.
Yeah.
Which I think is appropriate and good. If we get a comprehensive list, another supplement to that might be going in the other direction too, providing the complete list to the public and saying, here it is, what do you want to make out of it? Which is sort of, Metro is engaged in kind of a reverse RFP process now for public-private partnerships, for example. We want to do this basic objective. You out in the private sector, what do you think? Without defining an RFP or anything, just basically leaving it to the private sector to come back with their proposals.
Give us feedback. Yeah.
And concrete proposals. That parcel over there that we didn't think was a priority, maybe it is a priority for somebody who has a use for it in the private sector.
Yeah, people have different visions of things that we might not see, that those who are living in those communities every single day may see it another way.
Right. Members? Questions? I've got some other things.
Just briefly, and looking at some of the partnerships, the outside collaborations as well with some of the NGOs and nonprofits and those in the space. And is there? I think there may be an opportunity, although given limited resources and funds, because everything you add to the plate just takes more time. But the collaboration between folks like the SBA and youth development programs, the LAEDC and EDC, certainly SCAMP, the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing, which is a wealth of information and opportunity, as well as LACY, working with our LA Clean Tech Incubator, which I know you've worked with in the past and I think helped originally land them here. Some of those efforts to collaborate, since they also have resources and may be able to capitalize on some of their internal intellectual structures. Do you see that happening down the road as well as sort of a phase two or?
Oh, no, actually, we've been actively engaged in a relationship with the SBA and FDIC since I got there. We've reached out to each other and we try to work together with them and with the Federal Reserve and, to leverage all available resources. I think it would be most powerful if we combined the efforts of many as opposed to the efforts of few under some kind of a framework, if it's not an enhanced infrastructure financing district or an authority with sub-authorities or something, or we were talking about the JEDI zones, but a way to bundle everybody and say, okay, from this area to this area, we're going to throw everything we've got into this to push this community in this direction. So yeah, we've got great relationships with them already, and they will continue.
And since you brought it up, I appreciate that. And it's something that, looking at, since we lost also our enterprise zones and that opportunity,
Yes,
which was
yeah.
a huge loss. And I know there's been a lot of conversation, in fact, Chairman's motion on looking at the job and economic development incentive programs, those JEDI zones, and bringing those,
Right.
coming up with a comprehensive package. And it could be very similar to some of the things that we incorporated on our own to enhance enterprise zones, such as expanded and streamlined processing, permitting fees, DWP reductions in their bills, parking reductions and restrictions that we had with. So we lost all of those incentives as well.
Right.
When we lost the easies.
Right.
Is that, and I think the timing would be ripe to start bringing, is that an item that's going to be heard here soon? Is that something that's been, you guys have been working on at all? Where is that?
The status of the motion on the zones, I think we're. Next meeting. Oh, good. And actually, when we wrap this up, I'm going to make a recommendation relating to these as well that will tie into that.
Because I think it's,
So we'll be hearing
Great.
that at the next meeting, and then we'll hopefully also be hearing, what I'm
Good.
going to suggest is that the CAO and CLA report back on the recommendations of the department that Ms. Perry just gave at the next meeting as well, and we can integrate those two reports into a consolidated platform that we can advance that.
And one other opportunity I forgot to mention is the State Infrastructure Bank. State Infrastructure Bank that deals with food processing and equipment purchase and light manufacturing and advanced manufacturing is an opportunity that we haven't fully exploited and could also be bundled into probably larger, more complex situations.
so we can essentially have a full package from real estate, job creating programs, and hiring, to infrastructure and capital equipment, with tax reductions and, some comprehensive, either a menu or at least
Yes.
something to be competitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have memorandum of understanding with a number of the entities that I've previously mentioned. The one element that is missing from this conversation, and not something that I can change, but you need to focus on that, is the planning. Okay? Because people get stuck there.
Yes,
And-
yep.
And that I can't do anything about that. So, anyway.
Biggest obstacle.
Okay.
Yes, indeed.
There you go.
Actually introduced a motion on that subject today, so that will be coming down the pipeline as well. So, Mr. Bloomfield.
Great. A couple of questions, and I apologize. We had an E&E meeting scheduled at the same time, so
No, it's
I
fine.
came in a little late, and if you covered some of this, just stop me. But on the infrastructure bank, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to bring that up first and foremost, something I worked on the state level in terms of expanding it. I think there's some real opportunities there that we can take advantage of, so I'm glad you're looking at that. You mentioned the small business loan program. I had heard that there was a fair amount of the funding, we're only spending a small percentage of that now. Is that true, and what's the reason for, are we not utilizing it to its maximum potential, and if so, what's the reason, and how do we change it?
Well, so what I said earlier is that most of our functions in economic development are being funded by the community development block grant funds, and so obviously that's severely restricted and, a limited amount, and our available opportunity to fund the administrative functions, again, is very limited. So where we find the opportunity to create a revolving loan fund or a loan fund for microloans or micro enterprises is in workouts of Section 108 loans that we are seeking repayment because they've defaulted or just are not in good standing, and to collect that money, gather that money, put it in a fund, and use it to loan out in smaller increments and get it back so we can keep putting it out there.
Right, but the reason you're saying that we're not utilizing that to its potential at this point is because we don't have the administrative money to do it?
Correct.
Okay. Although that seems like the kind of thing that ultimately funds itself. If we just, obviously it's all about the interest rate, but if you put a little bit onto the interest rate, you can fund its own administration. So it shouldn't, in theory at least, it shouldn't be dependent on the CDBG money to make that happen. It should be its own revenue stream. Right?
Yeah, in theory, yeah. That's how
Okay.
the enterprise zones worked.
Yeah. So
Yeah, but they're gone, so yeah.
So
you're
how
right.
do we make that the practice? So that we're not reliant on CDBG money to make, or any other city money to make it happen, but it's a self-perpetuating fund.
So we're not relying on CDBG money to survive because we know we can't, because we're
Right.
already butting our heads up on the ceiling on the cap. What we're looking for is different opportunities to incentivize smaller enterprises that don't have the same federal restrictions that monies that come from the federal government do, but have more flexibility.
I guess so. I would love to see us reconfigure to see more of the microloan programs that we have, just like they have in San Francisco, that are running, that are quite successful. Even expand that to like a loan loss reserve program, and have it pay for itself. Have it basically its own revenue stream, and then we just need to get a little bit of upfront capital, and we don't have to worry about
Yeah, we just need some seed money to get it started.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know what we can need to do to jumpstart that, but I'd love us to
We'll give you some recommendations. on it.
to move that process forward. You were mentioning the CDBG money. Did we actually get penalized by HUD on CDBG? I know there was all the talk. Did we lose CDBG money in the process?
I don't, we did not, why don't you come and answer that question? I don't want to say something that's not right.
We haven't lost, sorry, Meg Barclay, EWDD. We haven't lost CDBG money per se. There are several outstanding findings right now where HUD could demand repayment from non-federal funds, which would not be a loss on our annual grant, but would be sort of a loss of money to the city. So it would have to be probably a general fund allocation that would go to just repay HUD because they have made a finding that we misspent or did not complete a project in time or haven't met a national objective, which is a requirement of the CDBG funds.
And I know a lot of this was inherited problems. I'm not
I know.
putting it on you guys, but I think we did.
Discussed it, yeah.
We did not only potential loss of funds, but we ended up redirecting a fair number of funds to cover some of our priorities that we didn't, which we ended up funding out of the general fund for all of, the domestic violence and all of the
Yes.
things that we care about that we now are funding and are on the hook to, at least morally on the hook for a while.
And that's the result of, on the public services side, there's also a cap. So the HUD just found that we were making public services expenditures over and above what is allowed under the public services cap.
And are there things, best practices that we need to be implementing now to avoid this, to fix the problem?
Well, what I did, I said this early on, is that. when I first got-
Sorry,
No, it's
I
okay.
came in
Don't
late
worry.
on this.
No, it's fine. I just wanted you to know that it's in the presentation, you can have a copy of it. I immediately went and got technical assistance, HUD technical assistance, to make sure that we were responsive to what HUD was asking of us and in compliance on a going forward basis and resolving any outstanding issues so that we wouldn't be penalized and that we, wouldn't have to ask for money out of the general fund.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Just on that last point, that, raises my red flags a little bit when I put my budget and finance cap on. I don't expect you to have any way to quantify that now, but at some point soon, it would be helpful to have a report to Budget and Finance about the potential risk that
Okay.
there is of a repayment obligation from non-federal funds.
Yes, we're working actually hand in hand with HCID right now on trying to assess overall, because the findings are around, EWDD projects and HCID projects. So to get a sense of what the potential exposure is and what we might be able to kind of settle, for lack of a better word, with HUD, maybe make a much smaller proposal and to try and close everything and get ourselves back to
One of the
a level
reasons
playing field.
that Meg was hired is because she left the CLA's office and went to HUD.
I was at headquarters for 5
Good.
years.
Well, I hope that'll help.
Yeah, I think it'll-
But regardless of
Yeah.
ultimate resolution and settlement, we at least need to be thinking, going into the budget year, of reserving for it as well. So I would, I'd like to at least provide some order of magnitude kind of estimate of that if we could. It's not really directly a part of this report, but I was thinking about the economic development element of the general plan, and it calls for a number of programs like retrofitting of commercial and industrial properties and making them more marketable and that sort of thing. Is there anything? Do we have any programs currently in place that perform any of those functions that are identified in the element? And
Well,
number one, and number two, are there other things that we should think about if we were to update the element?
yeah, I think if in updating the element, we have a very dynamic, very successful workforce development program with a very good focus on, high growth sectors and strong relationships with all of the community colleges in the region. And if there could be some language that highlights that, so we could encourage more people when they're looking for people to train or looking to fund training programs or looking for people to hire, that they would consider going to our work source centers and getting what they need there, developing those relationships so that they're nimble, they're very quick to adapt to whatever the marketplace brings forth. As we talk about some of these issues having to do with people going through the reentry process or people who have recovered from homelessness and need to go into green jobs, or just as an example, I was over at Trade Tech this morning at our Work Source Center operated by the Coalition for Responsible Community Development, and the governor made a surprise visit, and the audience was comprised of, they were lifers. They were people who had received life sentences that had been, I guess, commuted by the governor. And as they went through those in attendance, they were asked how many people had, 14 parole hearings. Lots of hands went up. I think they went up as high as 16, and then that was it. And many of them, stood up and thanked the governor for setting them free and giving them a chance. And now they're going through opportunities because some of them have been in jail or prison for so long they've missed the technological advances over the last 20 or 30 years. So they're learning about financial literacy. They're learning about the basics of using smartphones and computers and things like that. So those folks are coming from pretty far behind, but it's still a response to, recidivism and moving people forward rather than just letting them slide backwards and fall through the cracks. So the same could be said for any demographic that we feel we need to reach, and that kind of a perspective I would hope you would include in the economic development plan, so that people will start thinking about the resource that we have here that is working very well. And even though, they have lots of challenges with, they still hit and exceed their goals. And it's a great place to go and find people to put to work.
Thank you. Mr. Wesson? Okay.
One more kind of random question. We were talking about AB2 being a big priority of how we move forward. And I'm wondering what you think of it in terms of being able to really capture enough tax increment to make an impact, because unlike CRAs, we're prohibited from using any sort of school entity money, which was the lion's share of the tax increment. So it seems that in order to take advantage of AB2, you have to spread out a lot more base for a narrow project, which I think is going to be a challenge.
So you bond against the indebtedness, and that's what carries you as you build capacity, and perhaps you spread it out over a longer period, of where when we had a CRA, maybe we spread it out over 20 years under AB2. If we develop an authority and everybody's able to come to terms with what their proportional share would be as we grow the TI.
Everybody meaning which?
Those who sit on the authority. For example, city, county, maybe the community colleges, perhaps LAUSD, and whoever else. And, if you use that as a framework, and you add in, a JEDI zone, or if you add in an EIFD, something like that. Again, you will have that attention as to who gets how much and what based on how much they generate. In the past, when we set up redevelopment areas, it was traditional, I guess, in some ways, for the county to sue us for diversion of property tax revenue. So we've learned a lot of lessons, and I think maybe we can have some commonalities. The river can be a commonality. The tributaries off of the river can also be something that we hold in commonality. That will get whatever we do on the river, the 11 miles, go into those areas where, the defined river isn't there, but then there's the Bayona Creek system and maybe the Compton Creek system and other things that run off of that. That may be a way to bridge that gap, because we all have this TMDL obligation that we have to satisfy. That kind of unifies us, and that's one way to look at it. And, however, whatever crosses those borders to pull us together, not to pull us apart.
I didn't think that we could partner with the schools, though. I thought they were prohibited from partnering on this.
I don't know, on EIFDs?
Under AB2.
Oh, no, sorry, I was kind of leaping around.
Yeah.
They may very well be. I don't know. I was thinking about more like an EIFD, something like that.
We are, by the way, going to have a thorough discussion about AB2 at the next meeting of this committee, so some of those points we'll be able to flesh out a little bit.
Right.
And transportation is another tie that binds.
Yeah.
Okay.
But these are all great. I'm asking the questions not to discourage the use of them. I'm
Oh.
trying to encourage the use and just thinking out loud of some of the challenges that we're going to have with them.
The biggest challenge, you can look at our most recent history, again, is who gets how much. And it's based on who generates how much. And that's been the traditional approach. But, as we try to break this mold to push resources into areas that really need them and haven't been touched yet, I think with our workforce development metrics, we can make strong arguments for why we need to try a different approach. And we have a good foundation to show where we have been successful.
Thank you.
Just on the, you talked a little bit about the Section 108 loans, and
Yeah.
I get that we need to do a little bit better job of bringing some of that money back in and making it a revolving program. But going forward, how much are we getting ongoing from the federal government? Is that increasing, diminishing? Is it expected to continue? What's the prognosis for the future on Section 108?
Yeah, make an axe to that one.
Depends who wins the presidency.
Yeah, well, that's for sure.
Section 108 is it's a really cool thing that HUD did. They basically allow us to borrow up to 5 times our annual CDBG allocation, with the CDBG line of credit as the guarantee. So if a Section 108 loan doesn't get paid back, HUD just takes it off our line of credit. They don't ask questions. They just take the money back so that they can pay, because they actually, they collect this money so that they can put it out in other Section 108 loans. So we have a certain amount of our Section 108 borrowing capacity is based on the size of our CDBG line of credit. So we have a bunch of loans that have borrowed a lot of money that are currently, we're working those out to try and get them. They were mostly loans that were made before the recession started, and then the project stalled, and now they're in sort of a performance delay default situation, and we're working on getting them back into are you going to make this project or not? And if you are, then let's get going, so that you can start paying back the loan, because we have to pay HUD back no matter what.
Right.
So our borrowing capacity is we're still figuring out exactly how much we have out in loans versus what our ceiling is, and what's the difference. We were right up against it, so we're looking. But some of the loans have been repaid since then, and so we're assessing those balances. But we were right up against it a few years ago, and we haven't made a new Section 108 loan in a while, because we're still trying to assess as far as based on those repayments and what we may or may not need to need to recapture from delinquent borrowers what we might have available. But that is something that we are working on because we'd like to, once we figure out what that is, because it's never going to be enough, right? It's
Right.
never enough money to do, especially bigger projects, which is what we would want to do with Section 108. So we're working on also trying to come to council with this, once we figure out what that capacity is, what would be some recommended priorities or ways we would want to put that money out so that it could be, useful and repaid quickly so that we'd have the capacity to make other loans.
Do
Yes,
we have a
Mr. Johnson.
time frame on when you anticipate being able to come to the council, give us the data?
I think we can do it before the end of the year.
I think we can, yeah.
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 We already have a design for a micro loan program, so yeah, we can come back with a status report before the end of the year and give a.
We'd like to do that
show
sooner than
you
later.
Our proposed micro loan program.
And so along with that, given how many challenges that there have been with delinquency issues and so on, and we're not alone in that. That's a nationwide
yeah.
issue. So are there any changes anticipated or that have already taken place in the approval process, in the eligibility process? In any of those sorts of standards, have they changed?
I think that's exactly what we'd like to come back with and recommend. So
Good.
there weren't, basically 108 loans can be made for anything that you can use CDBG for. So if we can use it for anything. There's the regs as far as eligible uses go with the CDBG regs. So then CDBG is a very flexible program. So we are, wanting to maybe take a look at, well, what would be the kinds of projects that may not qualify or traditionally get conventional financing, but are still a pretty good risk considering that the block grant is at stake and those are pretty precious federal dollars.
Yeah,
So,
this-
and
this
that's
thing
what we've
about
been
risk
thinking
is kind
about.
of the key issue.
Exactly.
Because inherently, these are projects that there is a fair element of risk, otherwise they wouldn't
We wouldn't
need
be talking
this kind of a loan.
Yeah.
So,
And so, yeah, and in our report, we did talk about, we've hired some pretty good underwriters are on our staff now who have experience looking at potential borrowers and getting a sense of what is a calculated risk versus how can we be creative while still protecting ourselves from, we still have to be able to accept a little bit more loss than a conventional lender might accept, or, we're not going to make progress in the places that we need to make progress.
I mean, we
Right.
don't just accept a loss, We get economic development out of it.
Right.
It might even include the write down of land in exchange for job creation in an area where there were no jobs.
Yeah.
Hiring people who are hard to hire.
as part of that report back with recommendations, anything that you can suggest to expedite the process, make it more predictable for borrowers, and both in terms of eligibility, but also in terms of a timeline, that would be very helpful to have your recommendations on those lines as well.
That's fine. We can do that.
All right, anything else, members? I only have one card. Thank you, both. My one card is from Sarah Mitchell. Come on up. Ms. Mitchell, if anybody else would like to, John, you're just going to visit? You're not going to comment today? Okay. So,
Good afternoon, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell with the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA. We represent more than 400 businesses in the Valley. I just wanted to take a really quick second to applaud the council president for realizing there was a huge need for this committee and implementing it. I know we and our members are extremely excited that we have a huge representation from the Valley, so I know that our unique and specific needs and industries are definitely going to be paid attention to. And then the only other thing that we just want to add is, you have a fantastic staff over here. You all have fantastic staff. Please use us, the businesses, to, anytime you need specific businesses to talk to you about something and give you a focus group, kind of anything we can do, please keep us busy in this process as well. We want to make sure that we see some tangible solutions coming out of this committee, and I know I speak for John as well, I'm sure.
well, apparently you don't, because here he comes.
All right,
But
I retract that. I don't speak for you. You can.
thank you very much, Ms.
couldn't
Mitchell.
help himself.
I was actually going to draft him to come speak if he was going to offer comments anywhere near as generous as yours. So thank you. And now you're on the
Thank
spot.
I know I'm really on the hook, yeah. John Howland, Central City Association. I'll submit a card in a minute. Thank you. I would like to echo everything Sarah said. the committee going forward is off to a great start. The report is really good. One thing that really jumped out to me in the report is on page 10 at the very top, internal to the EWDD, to form an internal economic development advisory committee comprised of private sector thought leaders to advise the department on programs and policies. I know CCA has been working, Mr. Krikorian, with your office to bring in some folks to talk about some of the things the city does really well and some of the things the city could do better. I encourage that, and would even encourage that to go outside of the department. There is no monopoly on knowledge within this building, and there are a lot of places outside with a lot of great ideas. Innovation can come up from wherever, so I'm never one to encourage community meetings, but in some form to just put the word out that we are here to listen to some of the ideas out there, because there are a lot of people out there who probably have some great ideas of ways the city can do and even can do a better job of encouraging job growth, job creation, and bringing businesses into LA. And let's try and figure out a good way of doing that to hear the folks out there that may have one of those needle in the haystack ideas. Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you. All right, members, if there's nothing else, what I'd like to do is suggest that the recommendations that are contained in Ms. Perry's report are, in some respects, the architecture for a lot of what we're going to be producing in this committee. I think it's the first step that we'll be building upon. I think they're very good recommendations. What I'd like to do is hold them here until our next meeting, and at our next meeting I'd like to instruct the CAO and the CLA to report back to us with recommendations based on Ms. Perry's report of this report of November 12th and also the previous March 27th report. At that time, I'd also ask the department to come back with some suggestions for performance metrics to evaluate success in these strategies, especially given that we're going into budget season and we're going to be needing those anyway for that. And then I'd also like to instruct the CLA and the department to evaluate the economic development element of the general plan. Ms. Perry made some good suggestions, I think, for things that we ought to be adding into there. But let's take a more thorough look at it and really develop a list of, in an ideal world, with a comprehensive jobs creation strategy, what should be in the economic development element of 2015, and so that we can proceed on updating that as well. And if there's no objection with those suggestions, that will be the action of the committee. And I don't believe there's anything else before us. We have no general public comment cards. So just so you all know, our next meeting is scheduled for December 2nd at 3:30, also likely in this room. And at that time, we'll be talking about, as I mentioned, AB2 at some length. We'll be discussing my motion on the jobs and economic development incentive zones, and also talking about enhanced infrastructure financing districts. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.